I was just, yeah, this gonna be the drip on. Yeah, peace, dude. Already? I don't got no fears. I don't got no reference yet. You might have seven fingers, man. Yeah. You said you like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. Yeah, just go to the side a little quicker. Think of Roy. I'm gonna, I'm gonna take Lincoln. Me, you, Nathan, I think Holly. I think Grace might be on there. Those are the ones that
Good morning, everybody. Nice. Hello, everyone. We do have some strong coffee over here. Thanks so much for being here this morning. We really appreciate you coming out despite the storm warning and the gray skies. My name is Christina Sticker, and I'm the CEO of the Mountain Video Partnership. And we've been working with our partners at the Chamber to host this meeting. We want to thank our partners at Xcel for coming and talking about some of the power outages, both planned and unplanned, that have had a devastating impact on some of our local businesses. So our format for today is we're going to just say hello and introduce ourselves. We're going to give the floor to Xcel, and then each of you has a piece of paper and a pen on your chair. And just with a short amount of time today, we'll be collecting your questions and then filtering those. And then John Taylor sends his regrets. He is traveling right now and unable to be here. But we do have Jonathan Singer, who is the younger finance representing the chamber. So Jonathan, do you want to say anything before we get started?
Well, thank you, Christina. Maybe under funnier and funnier looking is what I'm trying to go for, but thank you for the comment. So, before we get started, I just want to say thank you to our partners at Xcel, but also thank you for your partnership in solving these problems and creating a better, stronger, more resilient network here. So we can make sure that as we move forward, that we're doing so in bidirectional communication. And so I'm grateful to all of our panelists here for taking the time to speak with us today, and we're ready to get kicked off.
Oh, is it? Okay. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you for coming out, especially with the weather. My name is Nick Cole, area manager for Boulder. I'm joined by Michael Lamb, our Senior Vice President of Customer Delivery Operations, Robert Kinney, the ESCO President of Colorado, and then our Director of Community Relations, Andrew Holder. Like I said, with the short amount of time we have, these slides are just going to queue up some of the questions that we know that you guys already have coming into this meeting. The slides have already been shared with the Boulder Chamber, so you guys will be able to have access to these slides. And as Bettina mentioned, we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. The questions that we can get through, we'll make sure that we filter those from the chamber, and then we'll get those answered in a timely fashion, guys. I get them. You can skip the first two. Okay. Yep. Perfect. Thank you. Oh, if you could go back. Oh, appreciate it. So for our outages that we experience in Colorado, they are different classifications. So the first one is momentary outages. So these outages are the quick minute, less than 5 minutes, very quick. The other ones that we experience obviously in Boulder are some of our sustained outages that last more than 5 minutes. And obviously we try to avoid these. And our planned outages, as you all experienced in April, our PSPS, these are the outages that we plan using different data points internally, whether that's our meteorologist team, our operations team, and different data points that we use internally. And these are outages that are planned by us, and we do these preemptively to make sure that everybody in the community is safe. And then the last one, major events. So think of these as major snowstorms, anything very weather related, wildfires, and these also cause outages. And these are the 4 different classifications that we have. So every outage is different. So the difference being the timing and if we are the ones that do the outage preemptively or not. So our top 6 outages that we experience all over Colorado and Boulder is no different. Severe weather. So that means, heavy wind, snow getting on our lines. Vegetation, we do have vegetation in some of our assets that come in contact with our power lines that cause outages as well. Vehicle accidents, unfortunately, some people aren't the best drivers, so sometimes people do drive into our poles, unfortunately, so that is something that we account for. Equipment related upgrade failures. We always make sure that we make sure all of our assets are up to date, but technology is very finicky. So we do have sometimes when we have to replace certain equipment out in the field. Wildlife, we do have birds, squirrels that sometimes get into our capacitor banks, disturb the line, especially on our wildfire safety settings, which I'll get into. And then to wrap us up, hit lines, undergrounding. So we do have underground lines that we have, and sometimes they do experience disruptions that we do have to take into account for. And again, just those lines have disturbances. And these are the top 6 that we experience all over Colorado, and these are no different than you guys experience in Boulder at the moment. So to get into our EPSS, so our EPSS is a setting that we use when we have identified that potentially in our areas that there could be wildfire risk. So basically, when we go into our EPSS, this is a setting that we use. So for example, if we determine that it's a red flag day from the National Weather Service, which is one of the data points that we do use, we will go into EPSS. And for example, if a bird hits the line or a tree branch hits the line, that disturbance will trigger our reconnectors on our power lines to lock out and the power will be shut off. When we're in these settings, we want to make sure that everybody is safe and our assets are safe as well. So when we're in these settings, it's an automatic power cuts off and we send out a physical lineman crew to go inspect the line. Sometimes we have to go to the feeder, sometimes all the way to the substation. It just depends. We do use drones to help expedite the process, but when we're in our EPSS settings, we do send a lineman crew to inspect the line. And at this moment, we don't have any way to notify residents when these outages can occur, because obviously when we're in these settings, we can't predict if a branch is going to hit the line, if an animal is going to hit the line or whatnot. So these settings, if there's any disturbance on the line, then that's automatic outage if there's any disturbance to the line. And the difference between EPSS and PSPS. So again, for EPSS, as I just mentioned, this is the setting that we use if you've identified that wildfire potential could be in the area. And this is a setting that we use. If we are an EPSS, that doesn't always guarantee that an outage is going to occur. It's just a preemptive setting that we use just to make sure that everybody in the area is safe. If there is a disturbance, there will be an outage, but if no disturbance is aligned, no outage will occur, but the setting will still be on our assets. For PSPS, this is a planned outage where you guys will get a heads up notification, which I'll show on the next slide. And this is something that we use ahead of time to, if we have identified that a storm is coming, wildfires are in the area, we will go ahead and plan an outage that you guys experienced in April. And this outage is something that you guys will get a heads up on. And this is something that we do plan. So the major difference, EPSS is a setting that we use preemptively. That doesn't mean that there will be an outage, just depends if there's a disturbance on the line. A PSPS is a pre-planned outage that we have determined just to make sure that everybody is safe and our assets are safe as well. And we do this ahead of time and everyone is informed ahead of time. So for our PSPS communications, as you guys can see here, we have committed to making sure that you guys are, everyone in the community is aware of when we do have to roll out these PSPS. We do understand that this does disturb business and just everyday life, but we don't take PSPSs lightly. We do these to make sure that everybody in the community is safe. And there are different data points that Michael and Robert will get into that we use to determine if a PSPS is appropriate in the situation. And as you can see, we aim to have 48 to 72 hours with our OEM groups, myself working with OEM groups and different stakeholders in the community to make sure that they're up to speed. And then you can just see the tear down system of the advanced notice that we want to provide to our customers and business owners in the community. Our OEM group is our emergency management office. So Mike Chard, if some of you guys know that group. So basically anything in the area from wildfires, whatnot, this group makes sure that communication is shared with the fire department, police chiefs and whatnot. So this group just makes sure that everybody's informed in the community. So for Boulder in particular, since January, from September, working with our system engineers, we've identified outages that have ranged from 1 minute all the way to 119 hours. And this does include the PSPS outage that did occur in April. And some of the causes, the top causes outside of the PSPS has been vegetation and wildlife contact while we were in our EPSS settings. So basically we were in our EPSS settings, a squirrel got in the capacitor bank, a bird hit the line, a tree branch hit the line, outage occurred, and then we had to send out a crew of guys to make sure that the line was undisturbed from any wildfire type of damage. And then we do have some other things, cable failures, line damage by construction. Those have occurred, but very minimal. Animal contact and vegetation were the main things that have caused outages. In particular, the outages that occurred August 9th and 16th, we were in our EPSS settings during those times. And we had animal contact for one, and I think vegetation might have been for another one, but those are the two main ones that we have discovered so far, just between January and September of 2024. So things that we have started, we rolled out a feeder blitz program earlier in the summer, around the time that we had the August 9th and 16th outages, and identifying 3 of the feeders in Boulder that have experienced some more frequent outages than we would expect. And we have made sure that they're technically sound and just trying to get a better understanding of what caused those. Wildlife proofing, adding more structures to our lines to make sure that it's harder for birds, squirrels, and whatnot to disturb our lines when we are in EPSS settings. We also have identified some of the feeders in the area that are close by locations where vegetation has been historically identified as an issue. So making sure that we're staying on top of our vegetation management in those areas. And future reliability efforts, which we will kick off with Robert and Michael after this slide. We have identified some projects in the area that we think will help with reliability in the area. And as far as growth, we know that A lot of you guys are business owners, and we know that that is a big thing for you all. And we have identified different opportunities for Boulder to grow, not just for today, but folks who want to come to Boulder and call this home for your guys' economic vitality. So this was just a kickoff slides. Again, folks will have access to this through the Boulder Chamber. Now we'll open it up for Q&A. And obviously, if you guys want to go back to reference some of these slides as we go, just let me know. So they need a microphone.
Even better, we got pretty quick questions there. You can have your questions out yet. We have to take advantage of that, and then we'll continue to take questions throughout the time frame here. But Tina, you want to ask a few questions here?
Thank you for that overview, Nick. Really appreciate that. And you pointed out some of the different strategies. I'm wondering if you could be a little bit more specific about the timeline and the plan for investments so that we can reduce the number and the duration of the outages.
Can you go back to the solutions slide, maybe? Okay. So can everybody hear me well? Well, good morning again. I'm Robert Kenny. I'm the president of the operating company. I've met some of you. Oh, just in case. All right. I've met some of you before. And so good to see you again. I've had the opportunity to be here several times since the PSPS. Maybe just a couple of preliminary remarks that I do want to make sure is clear. With the public safety power shutoff, we've only done that once. We've done that April 6th and April 7th. So I just want to distinguish between the outage that was preemptive, driven by enhanced wildfire risk, as compared to the other outages that may have occurred because of EPSS. And just to put a fine point on it, and Nick, you did an excellent job of the overview. When we have our lines set in EPSS and they're more sensitive to animal contact or branch contact, as you might imagine, we have to send one of our trouble workers or linemen out to physically inspect the line and put their eyes on it before it gets re-energized. And the rationale for that is if the line is damaged and on the ground and we were to re-energize it remotely, it could then cause exactly the risk that we were trying to mitigate and create a fire. So somebody has to come out and actually physically inspect that line. And so that's why when those outages occur attributable to EPSS, it'll take a bit longer. So having said that, some of the work that we're doing is already underway. So feeder blitz, and I'll let Michael talk a little bit more specifically about the timing. The feeder blitz is underway. Some of the vegetation management we do on a regular schedule of vegetation management as a part of our routine inspections. We also just recently filed a wildfire mitigation plan at the commission, and that covers years 25 through 27. And just very briefly, and if this is redundant, I don't know if you guys have already done an overview of the wildfire mitigation plan. Okay. I'll give you a brief overview of what's in the wildfire mitigation plan. And the wildfire mitigation plan that we filed builds on one that's already in place that we had filed in 2019 or 2020. But it takes into account the things that we've learned over the last 7 years, and it responds to how the wildfire risk has continued to evolve over those years. At a very high level, it contains 4 buckets where we have 4 buckets of work that we're doing. The first is adding additional situational awareness. And what is situational awareness? That means adding weather stations. So we add weather stations so that we can understand with greater particularity what the weather is going to be and where it's going to be before we take operational actions. We're also adding artificial intelligence cameras that are able to identify where a wildfire might be happening. So you might look off into the distance on a given day and see smoke and think that's a wildfire, but you have an inability to be able to identify with any level of precision where that smoke is coming from. These AI cameras, these artificial intelligence cameras that are going to be on our poles are able to use GPS locating and are able to distinguish where that fire is potentially locating so that we can deploy firefighting resources more quickly. That's something that's beneficial irrespective of whether the fire is caused by our equipment or something else. And it's really a recognition of the fact that we have equipment, poles that we can deploy these cameras on that will help solve what we think is a broader problem for society. So that's the situational awareness. They also are strengthening our system to make it more resilient. And that includes replacing small diameter wire with larger conductor, replacing bare wire with covered conductor, targeted undergrounding where it makes sense on the distribution lines. I just want to be clear about that. And those types of mechanisms will strengthen and make the system more resilient in the first instance. The third group of mitigations would be the operational mitigations, and that is enhanced power line safety settings and public safety power shutoffs. The enhanced power line safety settings, that's Nick already described that. Public safety power shutoff is a tool that we will use sparingly and in the most extreme circumstances. And I'll just very quickly, the criteria for PSPS is where the relative humidity in the air is very low, fuel moisture on the ground is very low as well, winds that are at the 99th percentile. And then we have a technology that we're deploying called TechnoSilva, that's wildfire modeling software that's able to determine that if a spark were to hit the ground or if a ignition were to start, it can measure the speed. Oh, wow. Let there be light. Thank you very much. The TechnoSilva software is able to determine how that fire might spread, how quickly it might spread, the direction that it would spread, the length of the flame. That's a tool that we have available to us that's not necessarily available to everybody else. And so people during the April 6th and April 7th windstorm looked and said, in my particular part of town, it wasn't windy. I didn't know what it was. But the TechnoSilva software is something that we have that tells us with greater detail how a fire might behave if an ignition were to start. So that's the criteria used for PSPS. And then the fourth bucket is making sure that we're communicating with you all. We acknowledged, I've been to the Boulder City Council, I've appeared in front of the Boulder Chamber, had quite a bit of opportunity to appear in front of the legislature and in front of our Public Utilities Commission. And so have heard with a lot of passion and fervor the feedback about how we executed that. And I think if you've heard me speak before, I was very clear in acknowledging that our communications needed to improve. And that's the slide, if you go back, the slide that Nick showed, that documents how we expect to communicate with our customers if we see PSPS criteria being met. So 24 or 48 to 72 hours, we want to make sure that we're communicating with our offices of emergency management, critical infrastructure providers like first responders, and customers that are using durable medical equipment. And the timeline of communications will be 72 to 48 hours, 48 to 24, 24 hours, and then T-minus. And we'll have the slide up. And you guys will have access to the slide, but we filed this particular communications plan at the commission based upon what we know is state of the art, so to speak, for what utilities do that have wildfire mitigation plans. This is the very common communication protocols. And so those are the four big buckets: resiliency, operational mitigations, communications, and situational awareness. So that's kind of just an overview. That plan is at the commission now and covers the years 25 to 27. But like I said, the work that's described on there, we're doing a lot of that work already.
Is this,
I think this is for the
Okay.
online.
so I'll just spend a couple minutes talking more about your question about the timelines. So I'm Michael Lamb. I'm pleased to be here. My responsibility at Xcel is to lead the groups that operate, maintain, build, and engineer the delivery system. So the transmission and the electric grid, as well as the natural gas infrastructure. So that's what I do at Xcel. And not assuming anything, the backbone of our distribution system, which starts at a substation, are called feeders. So feeders, and the timeline question, it's important for me to talk about feeders. Feeders might serve a couple thousand residential customers if that's all that is on that feeder. They might run 3 or 4 miles, and then they have something off of them called taps that run many, many more miles. The reason that's important is in today's infrastructure, when we're using a blunt instrument for EPSS and PSPS, part of the mitigation plan that Robert talked about is to put in place sectionalizing equipment, very smart reclosers / breakers on those feeders that allow us to be much more surgical. So in 2025, we plan to equip 100 feeders throughout Colorado with that advanced technology. 25 of those 100 serve Boulder. So 7 are already in progress to be complete roughly by January of 2025. An additional 14 will be done by the end of 25. And that covers the lion's share of the at-risk feeders, which would be in high-risk wildfire zones, as well as overhead serving the city of Boulder. So that's timeline to that technology itself. Targeted undergrounding timeline. Our goal is to do 50 miles in the state of Colorado in 2025. Somewhere between 5 and 20 of those miles are in Boulder. We're still scoping it out, working with all kinds of stakeholders. Again, that is designed to be done by 2025. And then we have similar goals in ramping up goals for 26 and 27. So I wanted to address your timeline question for those 2 big items specifically. It is countywide, and I don't know the answer to that. We can
We
follow
can
up.
take
with
that back.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is from the audience, and we like to, for example, we imagine that other communities share. How are you prioritizing these spaces? And this is a follow-up question. How we're encouraging electrification throughout places. Did you recommend businesses invest in public asset activities?
Other communities have these same concerns. Our reliability in 2024 has degraded, and I'll give you some data around that in the state of Colorado. I mean, at the risk of oversimplifying, we measure outages, well, as you saw earlier, those buckets, but basically we talk about how many outage events occur, so the number of outage events, and then the duration, the average duration of those outages. So we've seen an uptick in Colorado and Boulder similar to the whole overall state, actually a little bit higher. An increase in the frequency of outages in 24 as compared to 23 by something like 30%. And the real kicker here is the duration of those outages have doubled, sometimes tripled in high wildfire risk zones. And the reason for that, Robert alluded to. In the past, and when we weren't concerned about high wildfire risk, we would do we wouldn't do as thorough and a complete patrol as we do when there's elevated wildfire risk, because the consequences are just so great. So that feeder miles, we would patrol all miles of that feeder plus all tap miles. So instead of patrolling 4 or 5 miles, we're going to patrol 30 miles. It just takes longer. So the combination of those 2 things have resulted in our reliability degrading. To your question about backup generation, our goal is to be as reliable as we always have been. And we think of 2024 as an anomaly because of the operational processes and techniques we put in place to mitigate the wildfire risk, to ensure public safety. So Robert mentioned the WMP filed in Colorado. All of that investment is designed to make us more reliable than traditional, let alone significantly more reliable than in 24, as well as mitigate the risk. So if backup generation is a really personal, business-specific question, it's up to them, but our goal is to get back to traditional reliability measures, levels.
And can I just add, what we have in the wildfire mitigation plan, a proposal for rebates for backup generation for vulnerable customers who use durable medical equipment. So it's not for business customers, but it's for income qualified customers that use CPAP machines or oxygen machines. So we do have a program in our wildfire mitigation plan for that. The other question about the electrification of Boulder, we are promoting that. I think people know we have a pilot program that we proposed in our clean heat plan that got approved to electrify Pearl Street. And so we are, as a state, enhancing and promoting more electrification, beneficial electrification for buildings, moving away from using natural gas for home heating to electrifying where it makes sense. And so we do have some of those programs expected to
All right, so, we've got a couple of, lightning round questions. Before I get to that, I just want to thank, Kevin Eckley for keeping the technology running, and, for our Zoom friends out there, if you have questions, feel free to use the chat. You are muted, but that doesn't mean that your questions are, so feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll be putting these down as well. This couple of quick lightning round questions here, and one that's a little bit more in depth. Can you communicate when we are in, PPSS setting?
So, yes, we could, but here's the challenge with that. We have not, and it's something that we're contemplating. The rationale behind it is we will have our system in the wildfire safety settings, the wildfire safety operations, and it could be the case that you never notice it because there's not an outage. When an outage does happen, it's longer because we have to go out and inspect it. But one of the things that we're trying to balance is not oversaturating customers with information that's going to lead to panic, essentially. And so one of the things we have talked about internally is whether that's something we want to do so that people know on a given day whether a particular zone, wildfire safety operations. So we haven't made a decision yet. We don't do it now, but it's something we'll take.
Obviously, like health and safety, always the preference, but, the other question is, who are critical customers during our investments? How would a business get that into that? So, whether it's restaurants, pharmaceutical companies, there are places that are, the businesses livelihoods really depend on reliable power. So, who are those critical, customers apart from medical? And how do we get, how do our partners get at it?
Yeah, so critical customers, this is a definition that's also being proposed at the commission. We prioritize hospitals, firefighters, police stations, jails, water treatment facilities, those types of facilities that are truly critical to human existence. So pharmacies, I don't know if we have pharmacies on the list or not. We have not designated those as critical customers. So, and one might imagine that one could have a list that's so unwieldy that everybody becomes a critical customer, and that's simply not the case. But then customers that are on durable medical equipment that are low income customers, those are the ones, you know, for the battery backup program. So the list is, I think, relatively comprehensive, and it falls into the categories that I just described. Does that mean that list can't evolve? It could, but we also want to be thoughtful, deliberate, and intentional about what we would add to that list so that the list doesn't become so unwieldy that it includes that.
With thoughtful delivery, like when you, you can see you have some things you wanted to add.
Yeah, and that's just to add on to Robert's point, obviously we have the definition of the wildfire, but we also are looking at the office. My charge has been phenomenal for me there. I'm working with us to work through that, the list that we already have. We already have health sector awareness where our Robert's point in the hospitals, and things that are absolutely essential for our community to ensure that they stay safe and know when we do but one of the things I just want to add is we are continuing to work with those folks that kind of work through this list, and we are figuring out some ways that we can communicate with our customers. Because I think the essential part of this is pretty much like we are going to need a full lot of support, like yes. We were, you know, Robert told me the first time in part of the and we did run stuff. We were actually working with the Boulder Chamber, you know, giving you guys updated maps that we have available at the time of week. Update our out. You guys are going to see a phenomenal upgrading here in 25 and also I know that was one of the things that have been faced by the Boulder Chamber before in around the state. More comprehensive view of like where we're going to what the impact is going to be from the community, but also ensuring that you guys get preliminary updated information of the team. We have it, we want to inform our customers.
Thanks, Andrew, for that last follow-up question on this one. I understand there may be some security issues around this one, but the question here is, can we get a copy of the electrical grid? If not, is there a way for certain, probably, individuals, members within the trusted businesses to be able to get a copy of that? So we really want to understand this one.
Well, you're right. There would be security issues with providing a comprehensive map of the location of all our assets. You might imagine that that's not something typically you do because of security reasons, and you don't want to disclose the location of all of your substations, et cetera. It's something that we should give some thought to what we could or could not share with potential offices of emergency management. We can share with our commission. It's usually protected and under, making sure that we have the right non-disclosure agreements in place. So something to undertake, but I think candidly, between the outage maps, the PSPS map that we're describing and talking about, and the advanced notification should satisfy the same purpose of understanding the entire map of our system. Because I think the goal is to make sure that we are providing a high level of transparency and understanding when we are in wildfire safety operations or when we have a PSPS event of where that's happening. And then just generally speaking, when there are outages, you want to make sure that those outages are up to date, accurate, and precise, and that you are able to easily access those online.
All right, I'm gonna push you a little bit further here. This is a question from the we really appreciate you acknowledging and and if Xcel getting some mistakes in the amount of configuration before, is there a way to offset any of the large costs that affected some of the small businesses?
Yes, I've heard this question, not just from this community, but others. And I'll give the answer that I've given to the other communities and it may not satisfy. We have a claims process by which customers can make a claim if they have some loss that they've suffered. But as a general proposition, we don't compensate for business losses. We did make a donation after the April 6th and 7th event to the food bank that we understood lost food because we wanted to make sure that we were helping those vulnerable customers that needed it. But as a general proposition, we don't affirmatively make restitution. But like I said, there's an online claim process that customers can take advantage of.
Okay, I'm gonna ask an infrastructure question, which is the wildlife. And we obviously have some of the species of diversity of species in Colorado. But what can we do about birds becoming transformers? Could you do a little bit of a technical discussion of that? I mean, I know we all see birds on live wires all the time, right? So how can a bird take down an entire power grid?
This is where I need like a video or a picture perhaps, but I'll give it my best shot. So if you look up at a power line and you see three conductors from a pole, so there's three different, all I see is snow now. So there's three lines up on top of a power pole. Each of those lines has about 8,000 volts on it, and they're separate. There's 8,000 volts between the lines. So if a bird could touch one line and an adjacent line with a wingspan, then the bird becomes the path of the electricity, and that will trip a breaker that shuts the power off. If a bird just lands on one of the conductors and just stands there, no problem. A human could do that. I mean, if you could get up there and balance yourself, because you're not creating a path between two different sources at different levels of voltage. What's more common is not birds, but squirrels or something like a squirrel that gets across what we call an insulator. So again, if you look up at those poles, there's gray things that look like bells almost. There's, 1, 2, or 3 of them that the conductor sits on. If a squirrel or something like a squirrel can get their front paws on one side of that insulator and their back paws on the other side of the insulator, they become a path, which then creates an outage. So what we do for that is we install what we call animal guards. We make it really hard based on the size of the animal to cross an insulator. And for most bird species, they don't have a wingspan that can get across those conductors on the top of the pole. So we spend a lot of time animal proofing our system, not only on poles as they run down the street, but within substations as well. And one last comment, that you put a quarter in me, and I'm geeking out a little bit too much perhaps. When the weather turns and starts to get cold, animals seek heat. So our substations are a source of heat. It's warm next to a transformer, next to a hot conductor. So we're very attentive to, in the fall in particular, when the weather starts to turn. Hope that helps.
Thank you. I still don't really understand why it doesn't have all the time. If there were- Probably less. I have a follow-up question that is good to hear about the identification of the critical business. Here in Boulder, we also have the additional issue of the power was supposed to turn off on the side of the house, but it was also off traffic lights and all of our street lights. So it was very frankly eerie to wander around, particularly on the hill in August and downtown, to see no street lights. It was an issue of safety for the community. And I'm wondering if you haven't talked to that or if you have any ideas how we can do that.
Well, I think we want to make sure it doesn't happen. I mean, that's kind of the first line of defense that Michael described, all the things that we want to do in 1.5 to minimize and to maximize the reliability of the system. And I think it's important. I mean, the April 6th and April 7th event is, that I want to just make sure we understand that that's a distinct event. And there are outages that occur the August 9th and on the 16th event, and understand that those happen because of the wildfire safety site. It is also the case that outages occur because of equipment failure, because there's no piece of equipment that's perfect or will last forever. And so we want to make sure that we're bolstering the system as a general proposition to minimize the likelihood of those types of outages happening in the first place. But your question is, what do you do if it does happen? I mean, I think, there is an outage that's not attributable to EPSS, it's not a public safety power cutoff. And typically, traffic lights, then the traffic laws would kick in and do the four-way stops. But I mean, I think our first line of defense again is to make investments to make sure that outages.
All right, so we've got about 20 minutes and about 20 questions remaining. So, we'll try and get to many questions. But, so one of the top questions we received is, does Xcel believe the level of service experience is acceptable? And what can we plan to address the new normal of more frequent outages after climate change? We hear a lot about
Well, the level of service that you all have experienced, the specific things that we talked about with the EPSS, USPS, in the August 9th, 16th events in particular, we don't think that that's the service level that we want to provide. If I were looking at all of the investments that we intend to make, because that's not the level of service that we expect to provide. And I'll just say that, praise my fault. Our goal is to typically provide 99.5% reliability standard that we want to meet, that our customers have become accustomed to and that we deserve, and the investments that we described in the long-term completion plan that Michael described are intended to give you that level of service. The second question about the new normal attributable to climate change, the investments that we're making again are intended to bolster the system against wildfire, but then also make the system generally more resilient replacing small wires with a larger diameter wire, replacing air conductor with cover conductor, enhancing the inspection of our equipment. All of that is designed to enhance the resiliency of the system. It's primarily a wildfire mitigation play, but it also will have the extra added benefit of enhancing the reliability of the system more.
Follow-up question to that. So, what is the standard of notice that Xcel provide to businesses for future outages? I'd like to just differentiate, it's a different communication strategy to reach out to a business who you have a member of the property one, somebody who's being site and be a building. Their notification that you're getting to a residential company, testing to be very different. What are your plans for improving the communication, specifically communicating to businesses as opposed to?
If I may,
Please.
Obviously, in the PSPS thing, business owners and business leaders like Boulder there are going to be in that 24 to 48 hours. And that is something that we're committed to. I want to make sure that you guys will get communicating to the early we have the technology that will allow us to talk about over and use to add input changes to make those early determinations of real time. So we are committed to ensuring that you will know what is important. With the EPSS settings and outages that way, that goes to our previous point that I want to ensure that you guys know we are investing heavily in the outage map that we have. You guys go to the outage map that we have and we have historically. It is a good thing for the but there's continuing improvements into that to give you guys more accurate information of who's impacted by an outage, what the restoration timeline looks like, and more real-time events. Michael kind of touched on some of that, the high-tech reclosers and sectionalizers that we're going to put on those that are on there so that they get real-time data back for opening those out in Boulder. That's another tool that we modernize to make more real-time and all that.
I think that makes sense. It does put some of the burden on the so yeah, I have follow-up questions.
When we do planned outages for maintenance, we do also provide notice of that fact as well. I think I just want to be clear because so you're asking like, what's the standard of advance notice we're going to get for outages? I just want to make sure we're clear. If we're in EPSS settings, we don't know when there's going to be an outage. So the ability to give you advance notice of it doesn't exist. If we're going to execute a PSPS, and we've done one of those thus far, and that happens under extreme weather circumstances, this is the protocol we intend to follow. If we have a planned outage because we're doing some type of maintenance on the system, then we give advance notice to potentially impacted business events. And that's always been.
All right, now we have some directional questions, east-west questions to Xcel. So is it possible to move the west side of 13th Street, which is all businesses, to a partial grid and non-affected side?
I can't. Sorry, Mike.
I don't know the answer, because I would need to get into the specifics. I can't answer that question without specifics. I would guess, however, that it would be more economic to adjust the grid and not change the location of the businesses. But again, that's based strictly on my experience. Can't speak to the specifics of the street you mentioned.
I think it's hard to answer the question to say, can we move from the east to the west without, I'm not sure that solves the problem that we're describing without knowing the configuration of the system. So I think that I'm listening to Michael's answer and now I'm more clear on what the question was because maybe the question wasn't as clear to me. But moving from east to west may or may not even solve the problem because we don't know how the system's configured in that specific location that you're talking about.
Where the feeder is. Need a business.
Yeah. There's no way. That's a great system.
Yeah, the answer is yes. You can change, and to be clear, we can change how the area is served. We can change the grid to do what you're suggesting. But to get down to the specifics of how long would it take, how much would it cost, what would the specific changes, what specific changes would be helpful, I'd need to know most specifics. But absolutely, and in fact, a lot of our wildfire mitigation plan is filed is to do exactly what you're describing in mass. I defer to that's to you.
Well, no, for a couple of different things, I think we can work with a number of our different organizations. Well, Michael said earlier, what's contemplated in the wildfire mitigation, number of those sectional. I think that's that. So I think we can work with, not only your guys yourself and doing open houses, but even up in this and that, and what we need to do from that kind of standpoint. And then, to Robert's point, the specifics about we have that where our businesses are centrally located from the coast and other adjacencies out on a high level, just my thoughts over that. But we have a good idea of what an impact on for the specifics that Michael got, which is running from substation to substation, has a number of in the spiral out, they have 107 miles. Depending on how it's configured, I'll just look at that. We would probably have to see how things affect. They have questions that
Thank you, and I just want to add some more color to that. One of the things that's into us is assuming an arbitrary nature of profit. Because it will be one side of Houston or the West End. So I think some fundamental understanding about how the area is protected would be really helpful.
Well, I will say it's not arbitrary. And I've heard this feedback because people will look and see, well, I'm out, but somebody across the street isn't. That's a function of the configuration of the system and how these particular locations are served. And so, but it isn't, I mean, I don't know how to say it more bluntly than that, or less bluntly than that. It's not arbitrary. It's on configuration system. When we are placing a system in wildfire safety settings or EPSS, it's based upon what the data is telling us in terms of where the risk lies and which zones are going to be in wildfire safety settings. Now, that's a non-engineered explanation. Maybe Michael might be able to say something more intelligent about that.
I would never claim to be able to do that, Robert. But I will elaborate just a little bit. If you think of a substation as the origin of a feeder, which I described earlier, and that feeder goes out across the countryside for 3, 4, 5 miles. There's adjacent feeders that follow similar paths. And so one feeder could serve one side of the street and another feeder could serve across the street. And what's really important to the not arbitrary part of Robert's response is we look at where those feeders go in total. And if they go into high risk wildfire zones, we categorize them into three classifications. And we don't have sectionalizing on them. We're putting the entire feeder in EPSS. So one feeder serving one side of the street might eventually get to a high wildfire risk zone. The other feeder might not. So we wouldn't put that other feeder in EPSS.
So we'll keep going along the line here for a little bit. So, one of the big things for businesses, sells regulated utility, and so it's sort of idea here is predictability, right? And so, how accurate is the sales communications related to restoration of power and interest? So businesses make plans and predict where they need to go and what they can do to mitigate whatever risks they might be.
Well, I'll start by saying we can get better at that. There's no doubt. But that said, we can't provide information if we don't know it. So if you just think of a journey of an outage, any outage, we get noticed that a set of customers is out of power because we know from our sensing devices, or you call us. We don't really know anything at that point in time, other than some number of customers are out and where they're located. We don't know the specific cause of the outage. We don't know the repairs that may or may not be necessary to put the power back on. So just the life of an outage, we have to send somebody out to inspect, figure out what caused the outage, assess the damage that was done. It could literally be a 5-minute repair, or it literally could be a 5-hour. And I'm talking about a normal outage sort of on a normal day. So we need to get better at that for sure, but we also can't communicate information if we don't have it. So we need to make sure our customers understand that and we're setting their expectations correctly on what we actually have to provide.
Once again, thanks to our online audience. Feel free to put questions in the chat that will be ready as well. Anyone else have other questions here? George, you already got one, so maybe we'll jump it over to the team here, and George wants to jump in.
You mentioned the implementation of some AI cameras that we're going to do at fire to determine if there are fires outside their system. And wondering if there's also some other tools that could Xcel deploy non-manual crews to do inspection of the line, like drones or other tools.
Yeah, well, specific to the AI cameras, by the way, there are 4 being deployed in the Boulder area, and those should be deployed early first half of 2025, and we'll provide full visible coverage for the Boulder area. We already use drones extensively and a whole host of ways to inspect our lines that are industry leading. In fact, just as a fact, we were the first utility in North America to have what's called the on visual line of sight drone use approved by the FAA, and that was back in 2018. So we extensively use drones and high def cameras and technologies like LiDAR and infrared. And LiDAR is simply a way to measure distances, and infrared cameras to measure heat. To help us determine when our system is degrading before an outage event occurs.
All right, we're actually talking along pretty well here. We've got about 3 more questions. We've got 3 more minutes left. So any other questions from the audience before I go to the comments? I know we've had some more in-depth questions on the able to articulate in what we've written, so I'd like to cover them. You mentioned that some previous firefighters still more want to shuttle. That's correct.
More likely to be put in EPSS, the higher sensitive settings.
Have you ever been with the series moments that applied by those students? Reasons were about the UPS and backup generator that will less likely than a power shuttle.
Let us look into, we have tiered zones, tier 3, 2, and 1. Tiers 3 and 2 are the highest risk zones. And we have maps that delineate what the zones are. It might not necessarily tell you what heater you're being served by, but it'll tell you whether you're in a high risk zone or not. And just to be clear, I just want to, again, I think the nomenclature is important. When we place the system in EPSS, we're not proactively turning your power off. And we're changing the sensitivity on the settings, which could lead to an outage, and that outage might last longer. I want to distinguish that from us turning your power off.
Two quick questions. I keep saying it quick, and it turns out there's a lot I don't understand. So on the hill, it seems to be a lot of outages there. Is there a reason, or is that just the perception that there's a lot of outages on the hill? One other follow-up.
I'm not sure I know the answer. You guys know?
If not, you know,
Well, I mean, I'm here, you're saying there's more outages, you're asking why.
and I don't know if any of you have insight on that one. Yeah, so circle to your question, or circle back, so all the Boulder is going through what, Robin mentioned, so the strong wildfire going, all the city of Boulder, well, we're going through wildfire, so there is a separation in the city, so our CPSS goes, that is covering the whole city of Boulder. So as, Robin mentioned before, that's something that we done ahead of time, but the money is to resolve, makes the weather that's very different benefits.
And you'll get the advance notice of that based upon this schedule. But that's if those criteria are met with the high winds, low relative humidity, low fuel moisture, and then the techno-silva modeling. So that's dependent upon weather conditions, not specifically, and the weather conditions will correspond to the high fire risk zone. That's typically, you're going to get those high winds in a high risk zone. But that is something that is based upon those criteria, and that's where these protocols kick in of the advance notice.
About the outages on the real, more so. Those meters, is, you can double check on that, those meters are part of the, system, we heard in the summertime. Over there, the problem is, we're going to year after the outage, the outage, and it's too well with you guys, and we have to understand that, however, these meters, have been identified, and not, spot like this, so in terms of this, you know, and this, everything on first, we have identified that we're going to have this for 2,000 this year, so between vegetation and making sure that the penalties have, so that the wild gets out, plus, I need to go up a lot of times, but we're taking all that into consideration, and the end goal that we're talking about, that we reach out in this country. So a question on planned outages, well, two questions here. So around planned outages here, what are we doing to ensure that planned outages aren't occurring during operational disruptive times? So for example, during the school year, during school hours.
So I want to differentiate a normal day planned outage, which I think is what you're asking about. We work extensively with the impacted customers to mitigate and minimize the impact. So as just an example, we took a transmission outage a couple of weeks ago from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. to do maintenance work to mitigate the impact of customers. That's how we'll do a regular day planned outage. PSPS, however, that is not regular day, and that's based on the wildfire risk. So it's we don't do that same kind of reach out for a PSPS.
But as long as you're not doing that planned outage, 11 p.m. 2 a.m. during the let's say when my alarm clock is officially dead. So, all right, George, you have the last question.
Thanks for coming up. I hope you can get home okay. But this whole event, the number of events, is so impactful down here. The friends who are wrestling have some of the most losing food, obviously losing business at a time that none of them could afford it. And a number of them are still hurting. I understand what you said about cleaning, but I also understand that's not cleanable. And it would be nice, rather than saying there isn't any option for businesses making money. It would be nice to hear what you might do in the future to have a fund that everybody pays for out of their rates that would allow at least some of funding for business losses when you make the choice to power it off. That's number one. No answer necessary. Just it would be nice to have you at least make it with it. Number two, after a very frustrating time in watching power outages all over town, I watched as your truck, one of your trucks was in our alley behind my home. From somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, lights shining up, I think looking at whatever is at the top of the pole. But it seems that the inspection time was one of the biggest sources of lengthening the outage. And once again, I heard about drones, your cameras, but as you sit there at home after you've suffered problems at work, watching this go on was frustrating. So it would be nice to figure out a way when you're working to get the inspection of the lines done, but there was no damage that did. So anyhow, just a couple of comments. If you want to visit with me afterward and you want to answer anything you'd like, that would be great. And then the last part is if I decided to drive out about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, I'd walk around in town to see what was going on. If I couldn't get information. The street lights were out and the stoplights, the signals were out. Well, with all the lights out, you don't know where the signal is. So if you know exactly where you're going, that's great. But I watched cars running through darkened intersections. So I think this is a bigger problem than just it turns into a four-way. It turns into a four-way if you know there's a light there. Thank you, and I'll stick around a bit here with you to talk.
Given those, I know folks have to take off, we're at a hot time, but let's we can get an answer on any of that. Thank you for reminding us. Really, not just this goal, but the emotional goal.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to say about the creation of a fund for business losses. I'll thank you for the suggestion. We'll take it under advisement. The second question about the inspections and the pace at which we do the inspections, I think, as Michael said, you're specifically talking about the April 6th and 7th event. I think we had something like 600 miles worth of lines that needed to be inspected, not just in Boulder, but in other parts of the service territory. And between humans putting their eyes on it and drones putting their eyes on it, our goal was to restore power as quickly as possible. And there were places where you may not have seen damage to a line. I can promise you, we have the pictures to show it that we shared with the commission. There were places where there was damage to lines, the poles, vegetation that was ripped up from the ground at the roots. And so, and I'll say this very candidly, I apologize publicly for the lack of communication, but we know based upon what we saw that we made the correct decision with respect to the April 6th and 7th event. We can never prove a negative. We can look at the damage that was done to the poles and wires, and you can reasonably and logically conclude that had we not energized those lines, the ignition very well started. So we do believe that we protected the public. To the other point, though, about restoration times, our goal is to make sure that our outage maps are accurate so that you know where an outage is taking place. And the corollary to that would also be to make sure that we are able to provide you estimated times of restoration with as much precision as possible. But like Michael said, we won't be able to do that until we identify the outage, go and send one of our coworkers out to look at it, to assess the nature of the problem, and then we can make a determination whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours. But yes, that is our goal.
Well, thank you again. We're a
Thank
little bit
you.
over time. So, I'd like to close with, really acknowledge which is that the Peter Collective included improvements that affected the areas that we really suffered the most, here in Boulder. And, that's the first that I've actually heard about that. So it would be great for us to share that story with our businesses, and I think that would be a really wonderful, way to improve the communication. So just a suggestion, if you would like to include a written statement of that, we can send that out to the group that RSVP here. And I provide a little bit for us to be non-anomalous. So thanks again, everybody. Please follow us out there and,
Round of applause. Thank you.
I'm gonna run. Yeah. Oh.
It always happens. I don't know why, especially when I'm sitting there. Great. Thank you. Handshake.